Chapter 9, Part 1, Tuus. 42. Master Pilot Percy, Devlin cried, turning quickly toward the locked cases where he kept his larger rail-mounted weapons. Take this ship down lower. There's a lot of movement off the starboard bow. He unlocked two brass latches with the flick of his thumbs, opened the case, and heaved out a large blast rifle. Let's hold up here until we can see what is going on out there. Percy quickly obeyed Devlin's command. Stardeer was close enough to the ground to send ripples across the tall grass like a boat on shallow water. Percy drew Stardeer abruptly around to a halt. The fighter craft rocked gently backward and forward, turbines hissing. There it is, Cran said, pointing. You see it? A two-legged figure could be seen racing over the grassy knobs about a mile away from them, sometimes disappearing from view in shallow valleys, then reappearing again on each rise. It turned from a near parallel course with Stardeer, heading directly into the path of an oncoming plane storm. Well, that's suicide, man, or bird, Dreher exclaimed. Gabriel brought a pair of scans to his eyes and flipped the night lenses to the side. The next time the figure came into view on a rise, Gabriel focused. As I thought, he said, that's the same Usurapi rider we saw the other night. Well, he's not going to beat the storm going that way, Dreher said. He's not trying to beat the storm, Dreher Freygood, Devlin said, securing the blast rifle to a mounted revolving hinge near the helm. He's escaping into it. Percy, be a good fellow and back us up into the shadows of that bluff. The rocks might hide us better there. What I wouldn't give for a cloaking shield right about now. Devlin's right, Ott said. There are 3 Gharnian scout ships closing in on that rider from all sides. For whatever reason, they're still in pursuit. They're firing upon the rider, and he's returning fire. Gabriel found them in the scans. Could be the same ones that were tailing us. But I don't see any fighters, just scout ship with weapons. He searched the peripheral horizons for other Gharnian ships. Have they seen us? Binder wanted to know. He brought a pair of scans up to his eyes. I don't know. I don't think so. Well, I hope not. There's not a decent place to hide for miles, the commander said. We're sitting ducks out here. Devlin squinted. Plenty of places to hide, my friend, he said, if we need to. They watched the ships bank and close in on the Usurapi rider as he faded over the last misty hill into the torrential distant rain. It appeared as if the Gharnians were firing upon the rider in a succession of exploding volleys, just as they passed the last line of the horizon, but they could not be certain. It could have been the flashes of lightning instead. A few seconds later, and they were all gone from sight. Well, we can relax, Binder reported. I think they missed us. Wrong, Gabriel blurted from the other side of the deck. Look behind us, there's more of them. And they're heading this way. We've been spotted, Ott responded. Arm yourselves. Get us out of here, Master Pilot Percy, Devlin said, fastening the mount to a second blast gun. Everyone, prepare to move. Percy pressed the accelerator bar to full throttle. The noise of the turbines rose to a high pitch as Stardeer's nose rose skyward. The ship leaped like a rocket fired from the veil, accelerating into the sky at an incredible rate. 43. How many? Devlin asked, coming to the aft rail. How many are there? I count 9, Gabriel answered. 9? Binder confirmed, seizing a blast rifle. Mostly fighters. This could be part of that fleet we had missed earlier. I didn't lose them last night to be found by them again today, Devlin snapped. Well, that's not the worst of it, Ott said suddenly. Look to the east. Warship east, Binder cried. From the east it came, a flying city fortress of silver, black, and red, arcing in a calculated sweep of the sky to try to cut them off. It was incredibly malevolent looking. "We can't fight that," Binder cried. "Faster!" Devlin shouted above the wind. "Follow the Usurapi. Head directly into that storm." 3 of the 9 ships separated from the rest and advanced towards Stardeer as if ordered. 2 others veered off toward the Usurapi rider. Percy scanned the oncoming storm, keeping Stardeer just feet above the ground. The wall of rain from the purple storm clouds directly before them resembled a ferocious, live, pulsating entity of some sort, a solid, mavering mass. Nets of lightning ripped through the sky. Thunder reverberated through the air, through ship, earth, and bone. Tuus's homicidal storms, like this one, often rolled across the flatlands for miles and miles, building into nightmarishly destructive maelstroms that were reputed to be able to rip both flesh and marrow from bone. A cool front passed over them, whipping at Stardeer's flimsy interior dew tarp. The temperature dropped nearly 20 degrees almost instantly. The wind lashed from one direction, then another, as alternating cool and warm fronts taunted the delicate atmosphere. A few miles south, they saw twin twisters, raging destruction in the fields as if dancing with one another. "Visitor approaching port side," Ott cried out above the wind. One of the Gharnian fighter ships drew within 30 yards of them. Suddenly, it fired a warning missile, startling the crew. It exploded 2 ship lengths ahead of Stardeer, causing dirt and shrubbery to rain down upon their heads. "Get the young king below," Devlin called. "Binder, you're in charge." The commander quickly assessed the situation and took decisive control. "Dreher, get King Day below and take care of him there. Lake and Cran, below. Pythagoras and Gabriel, defend this ship with me and fire to destroy. Devlin, you're free to use your own means, but I suggest you remain close to Percy at the helm in case we have mishaps there. Try and get us out of this." The Usurapi rider had been engulfed by the storm and could not be seen now, followed by the scout ships and 2 fighter crafts. There were now 2 fighters coming up on the left of Stardeer and 3 on the right, with the great warship closing in aggressively from behind. Another missile exploded in front of Stardeer. This one was close enough to send a shockwave throughout the frame of the ship. The nose bounced a bit from the impact, but Percy was able to level her off and maintain his course and speed. One of the fighters closed in front of them, slowing to block their way. Percy steered masterfully around it without pause. "They're going to try to drive us to the ground before we can reach the cover of the storm," Devlin said. "They may try and clip us." "But we have an advantage," Gabriel said, aiming one of the mounted blast guns. "Their orders are to bring us in alive." He fired the huge gun. The side of the nearest Gharnian vessel exploded into a cloud of fire and spirals of smoke. The heat from the explosion washed past them. Tiny shrapnel noisily littered the Stardeer's flank like nails against a steel drum. The fighter ship arced to the side and crashed, rolling and bouncing in a ball of fire until it laid to rest, upside down in the windswept flowers and reeds below. Binder fired, again a hit, and another Gharnian ship was disabled and fell off behind. "Banking to port," Percy warned. 2 ships were squeezing in, directly ahead of them. "Hold on," Devlin called to those below. Stardeer rose and arced gracefully to the port side, rising up and over the Gharnians. They passed swiftly beneath, and then, immediately, they banked in opposite directions to circle back. Percy took Stardeer up at a dangerously steep incline, keeping her at full throttle, then shifted, heading back toward the mountainous and tumultuous purple-black storm clouds. Raindrops the size of olives began spotting the deck with loud, hammering splats. Percy, who had just closed the back wall of the helmsman cabin with his free hand, quickly fastened the hardcover rain shield roof over the pilot's chair. A burst of marble-sized hail drummed on them, and then it stopped. The warship was now below them and to their left, less than 50 yards away. A strange, hollow tube sound could be heard, and Binder cried out, "Get down!" Everyone dropped to the deck, even Percy, holding onto the guide stick above him with one hand. "Cover your ears," the commander warned. A red cylindrical canister reached its arc height a few feet away from the helm at midship, and it exploded in the air with a heavy thrum. It was a pressure stunner. Devlin, who was the closest to the blast, fell to the ground unconscious. "Master Pilot Percy!" Gabriel cried out, unable to hear his own voice because of the ringing in his ears. "Devlin is down. How are you?" Binder fired another shot at the closest fighter ship, missing, but Ott connected, instantly vaporizing the closest Gharnian fighter craft with a rainbow of fiery colors. He had hit the fuel tank. "They are as mad as hornets now," Binder said. "They could blow us out of the sky with ease if they wanted to. Now, we've got to get out of here." "What?" Ott cried. "Did you call for me?" His hearing was also temporarily impaired. "Percy!" Gabriel cried again. It was an incredible effort just to speak. The pressure stunner had knocked his breath from him, and he was struggling to get it back. "Report!" "I need help," the Mahekian answered finally, his telepathic voice hazy and faint. "Take the helm, someone. I need help." "I've got it," Gabriel shouted, running low across the deck. "Devlin, can you hear me? Are you all right? Devlin, answer me." A missile flew by them, dangerously close. "They're trying to clip us now," Binder called. "They'd rather take their chances and hit us rather than to lose completely in the storm." The sky ahead was as dark as night. Long, crooked bolts of lightning ripped through the sky, burrowing into a distant hill. The dark hills turned white with each vivid electrical display. The smell of burnt sulfur filled the air. The first wave of hard rain poured down on Stardeer in drenching gushes like added weight, saturating everything instantly. "Get below," Gabriel ordered Percy. "Take the wizard if you can. I've got Stardeer. Here comes the storm. Hold on." Rain blew in so hard that all visibility was instantly gone. Hail pounded in ferocious spurts like meteors, denting the plasteel hull and tearing holes in the thick canvas tarps. Binder and Ott joined Gabriel at the helm, both soaked to the bone, but with the fire of battle flaring boldly in their eyes. They looked out through the wide rear window. The sun-slit, frosted green hills of Tuus were soon obscured and then lost from view behind them. Gabriel kept a dangerously fast pace, flying blindly just a few feet above the whipping grasses, but eventually he was forced to slow down to compensate for his lack of vision and the increasing turbulence. The wind was incredibly loud. It wailed and shrieked and roared, tossing them first in one direction and then another. The rain fell hard enough to press the ship almost to the ground. "I can hardly breathe," Ott exclaimed. "Are we underwater?" A Gharnian ship cruised slowly past, just a few feet above them. Binder stretched his arm up and touched the rear dorsal fin as it crept blindly past. Fortunately, their scanners would be as useless in the storm as they were aboard Stardeer. Gabriel turned their ship directly south and crept away at the same snail's pace they had used the night before in the jungle forests. The warship won't come in after us, Binder supposed. They'll circle the storm and wait for us on the other side with reinforcements. Percy had not yet gone below. He sat with his head in his hands near Gabriel's feet. Devlin, on the ground beside him, began to stir, shaking his head as though clearing stifling webs from his mind. He looked around, empty-eyed. A leak in the roof poured a trail of rainwater on his head and face, but he didn't seem to notice or mind. Part of the roof suddenly blew back from the wind, dousing all of them anew with cold rainwater. Ott and Binder seized it and began reattaching it more securely. "I think we're safe for the time being," Gabriel said. "The Gharnians are as lost in the storm as we are. Everyone okay? Advise me on any injuries." Dreher poked his head up from below. "I've turned on the internal cabin pump. We've got a lot of water coming in. We're flooded inches down here already." It'll be all right," Percy advised, nodding. "I just need a few minutes." Suddenly, the wind scooped up under the ship like a giant hand, pushing Stardeer nearly onto her side. Gabriel fought to keep her steady and right side up. "By the gods!" he swore. "Let's hope this storm doesn't prove worse than the Gharnians," Devlin said, grunting with every movement. He tried to stand, but he was unable. He lay back, dizzy, resting beneath the console. What was it? A pressure stunner? It feels as though my insides have been knocked out of me. And my aching head." The ship moaned and whistled in the wind. Dreher came up onto the deck, squeezing in with the rest of them. "Everyone's fine below," he reported. "We're batting down pretty good. King Jameson is secured in his favorite hammock chair with a book. Let me help secure this area and get the weapons out of this rain before they're ruined. We don't want them malfunctioning when we need them next. Where are the Gharnians? Can you see them? Can you see anything in this?" "Not a thing," Gabriel answered, checking over the helmsman console. Water was dripping in all around them. "This overhang is hardly adequate for rain blowing in at this angle. It's pouring through the gaps around the edges." He rolled the tarp handle tighter, taking up all the slack he could. "Turn on the lights," Devlin said. "We don't want to accidentally hit anything or run aground. The Gharnians won't see us unless they run into us now anyway." Gabriel turned to the wizard and grimaced, but he complied. The torrential rain continued. 44. Two days passed without reprieve from the rain. Sometimes it was a mild downpour, and other times it was impossible to do anything but hunker down and wait for it to subside. They had kept on course in any case, despite the efforts of an angry wind, and had covered many, many miles without the sight of the Gharnian fleet. In fact, there was not much to see in Tuus on the best and brightest of days. No trees, no hills to speak of, and very little wildlife. Only slow, flat, sloping fields of grasses and reeds, mostly mired in swampy mires and new lakes that came and went with the rains. Ott had provided a fine dinner by hunting for a few hours that second evening. He had simply crept over the rail of the ship and disappeared into the mists and rain, and then, hardly any time later, returned with a wild pig and 2 medium-sized wild plains turkeys. He had also come across a goodly number of wild red yams and a batch of late-blooming May-apples for everyone else. He was a strict carnivore himself, which Dreher Freygood combined with butter, sugar, cinnamon, and pears into a delicious baked pie. Dinner was served below a few hours after sunset, with some mirth provided by Dreher's fine voice and musical abilities. On the third day, traversing Tuus, the skies had nearly cleared except for spotty patches of rain clouds that could still attack quite suddenly at times. But as evening came, it was certain that they were about to enter another major storm system, visible at every corner, perhaps the worst system they had encountered thus far. They assessed their options and saw no other choice but to stay on course and manage as best they could. Luck had served them well enough thus far, they thought. They secured everything down and water sealed the spots that had previously opened and leaked. They ate a fastidious dinner of leftovers and prepared for the worst as the next substantial rain began to fall. Most of the crew were below deck, warm and dry. Ott was at the helm, braving the elements, and Commander Binder was at his side, surveying the frightening skies ahead through scans. A twister dove from the spinning clouds like a jabbing finger a few miles to the west. It cut into the earth, then dissipated back up into nothingness within a matter of seconds. "This looks bad," the Gharnian said, holding a white knuckle to the guide bar. Despite his steady steer, the ship was being heaved as much sideways by the relentless wind as it was moving forward. Very bad, curse this flat land. Binder didn't disagree. "I've never seen so much rain," he replied. "This country soaks it up like a sponge. By my estimates, Tuus should be under 10 feet of water by now." Pythagoras nodded. "I suspect vast underground caverns and rivers that wash the rainwater away off to the sea. Perhaps a great subterranean ocean lies beneath this land." The heavy skies opened up on top of them, and they passed through another leaden curtain of water that blew in nearly horizontal from their port side. Despite the sound of the rain pounding on their ship and the raging wind in their ears, the two of them could partially hear a song starting below. Dreher had pulled out his mandolin once again and had begun to entertain the rest of the crew. It had a miraculous effect on weary hearts and minds whenever he did that. It even made the two of them smile, as drenched and as cold as they were. "Pythagoras, I'm not much for apologies, but I'll admit I was wrong about you," Commander Binder said in a rare moment of sincerity and openness, thinking it might be the right time for having a few overdue words with him. "I'm sorry for the way I treated you before." Ott looked at the man sidelong. That's not necessary, Commander. We're professional soldiers." Binder shrugged. "Nevertheless, I'll admit I didn't behave professionally to you. I let a personal bias cloud me, a long-time prejudice, and it was wrong of me to behave foolishly." Ott nodded gratefully. "Apology accepted, my friend. We all carry burdens from our past that are hard to shed." Lightning flashed so bright that they closed their eyes. The thunder rattled everything on their craft. "I was taken prisoner as a child," Binder reluctantly explained deeper. "I still see those memories through the eyes of a child, I suppose. When I became a bit older, I was forced to work the algystone mines for several years," he explained. "Slave labor for food and shelter. In many ways, those experiences made me who I am today, stronger." Ott stared out the front window. It was nearly impossible to see anything at all. A strong gust of wind pushed the ship sideways with a bump, then let it go. "Your captors were tortoises?" "We lived in a small rustic coastal town 100 miles south of Poed, near an inlet of a beautiful little lagoon in Gorn, my family and me, a wayside for pirates and travelers selling their wares to the north and south of us. We had a shabby little inn there and a livery stable, run by my parents and my uncle. Thordians and humans did not get along in those parts. They had for decades. Skirmishes were common, as was kidnapping and slavery on both sides. Thordian mercenaries killed my parents one winter night and took me into the caves in the southern swamps. I was but 12 years old. My whole village was burned to the ground and I was enslaved. I survived there for many years before a truce was negotiated and they finally released me. There were racial skirmishes here and there, I've heard. Binder's face grimaced. Those types of things still existed in a few places, even at that time. He hoped someday they wouldn't anywhere. Dedlin and Dreher have told me of your past, Ott said. I'm sorry, Commander. I found that there are good and bad in every race, mine included. No one can be held accountable for the actions of a few others who tarnish their own reputations and soil the reputations of others. Otherwise, we would all be held in contempt. I do not condone, nor am I responsible for the actions of any other living creature, Thordian or otherwise. Only for myself, Commander Binder, as are you. Yes, I understand and agree with that, Pythagoras, he said. Sometimes the childhood fears that still linger in someone's heart suppresses the rationale in their mind once grown to adults. When nightmares are filled with images burned deep from events of childhood, it's hard to let go of the hate and mistrust that they created subconsciously, he replied, shouting above the wail of the weather. That's no excuse, but it's the truth. What I mean to say is, I'll try from now on. Ott nodded. Hope it all passes. A battering ram of wind littered the port side hull of the ship with a barrage of uprooted reeds and grasses and pebbles and several prolonged pounding blasts, some bursting through the tarp like shrapnel. They stung the skin like pins and needles. The Star Deer tipped far up onto its side with a metallic groan, caught atop a wave of gale-force wind, sliding and spinning counterclockwise until Ott could finally right it and regain control once again. The ship was being pressed hard to the west. Ott gripped the guide stick and accelerator bar with steel fists, gritting his teeth. Perhaps our new friendship will go a long way towards the therapy you require, he said. Clearly straining, the wind increased even more. The ship shook and rattled. And I'm not trying to be rude, but I'm sorry I'm unable to give you the undivided attention you deserve anymore right now. I may be losing control here. I think I'm losing the ship. What is it? What is wrong? Should I relieve you? Binder asked. Part of the roof above the helmsman's chair ripped off, twisting on a flimsy attachment pin in the frame like a battered flag. I tried to seize it, but it tore off and was instantly gone, spinning off into the misty deluge. Damn, he cried. Hold on. 3 times the battering ram returned to punch and pummel the skycraft. Stardeer was knocked sideways by terrible bursts of wind, spinning like flicked coin on a tabletop. Ott's footing slipped and he released his grip. The wind caught the ship, pulling it up into the sky, then released it. It rolled completely up and over, nearly onto its back. The ship's plasteel frame groaned under the pressure. Binder tumbled, sliding across the deck. Ott nearly fell from the ship out on the side door. Whatever was not strapped down on deck was now lost. Damnation! Binder cried, rolling onto his head. Ott grabbed the guide stick before we flipped over. The wide, hot bolt of lightning pierced the sky and buried itself into the earth, less than 20 yards from the ship, and thunder pounded down upon them like a massive drum. There was an instant smell of char. and a taste of copper on their tongues. Static electricity wreaked havoc on both the crew and the instruments of Stardeer. Then, for a moment, the wind gently released the ship. Sprawled across the twisted roof of the helmsman's cabin, Ott leaned in and twisted the bent guide stick over, and Stardeer leveled off with a sad, beaten hiss. The ship bounced and bobbed as though on a spring, slowly spinning as the wind pushed it along to the northeast, like a paper boat loose in a rushing stream, up and then over a wide hill. Devlin's fuzzy head popped up from below. "Take her down," he said. "Anchor my ship. This is ludicrous. We'll sit it out for a while. This storm will kill us and destroy my skycraft. Everything is topsy-turvy down here. We're rolling around like balls in a box. Down, down." "I broke another string," Dreher cried from below. They eased slowly into a pinch in the shallow hollow, where they hoped the majority of the wind might pass them by overhead, and secure the four-corner anchor screws as best they could into the soggy earth. As Ott began shutting down the controls of the ship, ironically, the storm seemed to slacken, and even pause altogether. Just the thrum of a constant falling vertical rain and distant thunder rolling around the hills in all directions, out beyond any hope of visibility. As Ott looked up and around, the skies turned a pale shade of green. The guide stick and the accelerator bar went completely limp in his grasp. "It's green," he said. Down below, everything was in disarray. "Let's take stock of our supplies and get this mess cleaned up. Poor ship. She held together, but I'll wager she needs some tending to. Check for any significant damage," the wizard instructed the crew. Outside, the sound of the roaring wind had swirled off and died away, barely more than a vacant carnival whistle. "Goes from one extreme to the other here in this forsaken land." "I don't like it," Gabriel said. "It's too damn quiet out there, like a tiger eyeing us from the bushes." The rain and wind then stopped completely. There was an eerie, dead silence all around them. It was so quiet and peaceful that they could hear solitary drops of water plopping from the cracks in the ceiling into puddles on tables, chairs, and the floor all around them. The air pressure then changed, too, as if they were now sitting in some type of great vacuum that made it difficult for them to breathe the air. Jameson peered out the window. "Look," he said, "the skies are as green as clover." "Not only that, what kind of sorcery is this?" Gabriel said as he joined Jameson by the window, his voice barely above a whisper, as though he was seeing something that he just couldn't believe. He rubbed the condensation from the porthole with his sleeve. Looking outside, "Devlin, the rain is falling upward." Devlin looked out one window, then quickly out another on the other side. His eyes confirmed Gabriel's observation. Droplets of water were riding up the stems of the reeds and grasses, and then they were falling upward into the sky. "Oh, no," he whispered. He could feel it. It's coming." From somewhere miles above them, a distant noise was fast approaching, like the amplified roar of a mighty thunderous engine. As it fell down from the heavens toward them, it got exponentially louder and louder. The air pressure squeezed in their ears, and Stardeer began rattling uncontrollably. "Grab onto something!" Devlin cried out, diving for an affixed table leg. "It's a twister!" The tornado's first blast rendered all controls useless. Stardeer was ripped from the earth, her anchors flailing uselessly. They were sucked up skywards, thrown across the hill, rolling and bouncing and spinning. The ship spun like a top, pinning the crew against the walls. Panels burst, windows shattered, doors cracked, and the ship's frame squealed in an effort to resist snapping and holding together. They were upside down, then right side up. The rainwater found every new way to get inside. Lightning flashed nearby them. Electricity burnt the air. Gabriel was screaming up at Ott and Binder, but the roar was too great for him to be heard. His mouth moved soundlessly. Outside, Commander Binder had gripped onto the guide stick with welded fists alongside Pythagoras. Both of them fought to regain some stability, but it was no use. The interior lights flickered off and on in rapid succession. Stardeer was pointed nose up, rising and falling. Then she began spinning like a turnwheel. They slammed one way, then another. There were screams all throughout the skycraft. Jameson clenched his eyes tight, spinning uncontrollably in his hammock chair, arms wrapped tightly about the taut ropes. Devlin was lodged underneath a wedge cabinet on the ceiling, powerless. Then, as quickly as it came, the tornado then let them go. It dissipated in a whoosh and died, ending as abruptly as it had started. The fighter craft skidded and slid to a tilted halt, right side up, with a gentle thump, her nose brushing the ground. The rain returned in earnest. Somehow, thankfully, everyone was still alive and miraculously still on board. The entire incident had taken less than 20 seconds from start to finish. The power returned, the lights flickered on, Stardeer's turbines kicked in, and with a groan, she righted herself, and in the aftermath, now only the rain could be heard, tapping nonchalantly upon the dented and damaged fighter craft hull. "I'm going to be sick," Jameson moaned from his chair. Lake, lying on the floor, had already vomited. Ott fired up the turbines, and Stardeer rose up a few more feet from the ground with some effort. Through the cracked front window, he and Binder watched a new funnel cloud as it swirled away toward the west, riding the sky like a rodeo rider. Still it poured, the wind howled, and the grass and bushes rained down on them from the sky. Ott steered Stardeer to another low spot between the hills and let her hover a few feet above a newly formed raging stream. Then he resisted against the wall, exhausted. Gabriel's head popped up from below. "Dreher's hurt," he said. "A toolbox got him in the head, and he's losing a lot of blood. Devlin, Lake, and Cran all suffered some minor injuries as well. How are you two faring topside?" They both nodded, but there was a trail of blood dripping down Ott's face. He, too, had a minor head wound. "Well, the worst of it's over," Devlin replied below. A drip of water hung from his hooked nose. "Now, at least for a minute. Anchor this ship again if you can. Let us all come below where it's drier and rest. Let us see to Drefregood's injury. We must mend while we check the ship over." What an episode. What else could befall us in this place? I dare not chance to think. Oh, my poor Stardeer, you are a wreck. "45. The storm raged for 2 more hours, and the temperature outside dropped dramatically. Night had fallen like a wet velvet blanket all around them. Inside Stardeer, however, for the most part, although still damp in spots, it was warm and cozy. The crew moved about the lower deck with only the pale light cast from the stove fire and the blue stone at the tip of Devlin's walking cane. Occasionally, the windows were lit by flashes of lingering lightning. Gabriel, Binder, and Ott had spent a good bit of time outside in the rain repairing damage to the hull and the roof. A lot of provisions topside were gone, including one of the 3 small sky sleds. Percy had stitched and bandaged both Ott and Dreher's head wounds and had seen to the others' injuries as well. Shortly thereafter, he crept into one of the darkened lofts and slept. His sensitive skin had been severely shocked by both the Gharnian stunner and the static electricity emitted by the proximate lightning strikes, so he needed some rest. It would take a couple of days for him to recover completely. Until then, it would be up to the others to divide the piloting responsibilities. Other than that, the crew was fine, although the interior of the ship was a disastrous wreck. Charts, maps, lamp oil, clothes, blankets, utensils, weapons, and boxes, and small equipment were scattered around on the cots and shelves and piled up in the corners. With Devlin's occasional direction, Jameson helped Lake and Gran clean up. Gabriel jumped in as well, circling and recircling the main galley and smaller side rooms with a mop. There were a few substantial leaks to repair. One window that had been boarded up was not watertight, and 2 broken lower windows were letting water in around their frames. There were a number of moist streaks showing between slats in the rear above the food compartment, and the roof had several circles of pooling moisture, 2 of which dripped constantly. The drain in the center of the galley floor kept a puddle 3 feet in diameter and about an inch deep. The bilge pump hummed continuously below. Binder reported that the turbines appeared undamaged and that, after a minor repair, the vacuum fuelage tank was as airtight and as stable as ever. The foremost windshield had a large crack in it, and 2 other windows topside were completely shattered. Thankfully, none of the major flight mechanisms had been affected, although they were wet and steaming alive. Clothes were hung up about the galley wall on makeshift clotheslines. Their bedding and most of their food was wet. They saved what meats and cheeses they could. Most bottles were broken. Lake separated the good from the bad, while Clan tried diligently to dry the shelves and storage areas. All in all, Gabriel reported as he emerged from the dressing room in moderately dry attire, we're in good shape, considering that we were inside a tornado. The rain has slackened. I suggest that we move on. Not until after dinner, Dreher replied from his bunk. I can't travel another inch on an empty stomach. Besides, we need to eat this food before it goes bad. An evening of rest could not hurt, Devlin advised. We all need it. But the storms are ending and the skies are relatively clear at times, so I suggest a quiet night on our part, no singing or loud voices. We have been lucky insofar as the Gharnians go, so let's not get careless. We're in no shape to fight tonight. Surely they have circled these storms and now search the plains high and low for us. One tiny spark of light could be detected for miles out here. Let's eat and use this time to think, organize, and strategize. A soggy dinner was made and consumed on what was left of their cracked cups and shared dishes. Spirits were as damp as their food and clothes, but appetites were eventually satisfied. Except for a few meager scraps, the cupboards were now virtually empty. Devlin's cache of coffee was one item of luxury that went unscathed. The small burlap bag of beans was safe and dry within an airtight oak box, secured fastidiously upon a narrow shelf. Dreher kept everyone's mugs filled with the warm, invigorating brew. Shortly after supper, Devlin had his smoke, things were cleared from the center table and a map was rolled out to begin plotting an alternative, more predictable course into Gorn. Devlin called the crew to gather around. He placed one finger on the present location and another at the western border of central Gorn. It is my assumption that the Gharnians are amassing along the Gharnian River now and are waiting to ambush us there. Abruptly, Dreher stood and cocked his head as if he had heard a noise from above. Did anyone hear that? I think there's someone outside, at the door. A general splattering of rain on the deck above and the whistle of wind were the only sounds they could hear. I didn't hear anything, Gabriel said. Then they all heard it. A knocking. 3 gentle raps from the outer galley door. No one from the crew was missing. All 9 members were present and accounted for. Quietly, they readied their weapons and together edged toward the short flight of stairs that led to the upper deck. The lights were out. It was as black as tar in the stairwell. Stay back, Your Highness, I urged, whispering to Jameson. I fear the worst. The fur on my neck is bristling. Devlin led the way toward the door. Behind me, he whispered to them. He eased his way up the 3 narrow steps and placed his hand on the door latch, cane ready in the other. Let us have a see, he said, peering through the foggy circular window. Interesting, he said curiously. Prepare yourselves. Then, with a twist of the handle and a jerk, he popped the door open and a flood of water poured in. Through the doorway, down the steps, and across the galley floor. Lightning flashed beyond, silhouetting a huge figure of a man standing just outside in a sheer wall of icy blue rain. Do not move, Commander Binder ordered, his blast rifle extending over the wizard's right shoulder. We have weapons drawn upon you. There was no response for a moment. The figure staggered, and then, in a deep rumbling voice, he spoke. I do not wish to fight. I need help, he simply said, and his request was followed by another bellow of ominous thunder. Devlin, still the closest to the door, addressed the man again. Tell us who you are, he said. What is your name, and where are you from? Quickly, I say. A gust of wind brought another shower of chilly rain through into the galley. Speak, Devlin commanded. The man put one hand up as if surrendering to them. The other hung listlessly at his side. Blood ran from it in rivulets to the floor. His knees buckled and he almost fell, just catching himself against the door jamb, where he remained leaning, chin against his chest. There was a metallic sound of rushing, rattling air, as if he was forced to breathe through a series of metal tubes. The lightning flashed again, outlining his massive form. He was immense. My name is Kadazat, he answered as best he could. I am from Garn, although I am no longer a soldier. Not anymore. I mean you no harm. I am hurt. Quite seriously. Perhaps mortally. There was nowhere else to turn, and I fear I am in shock and losing consciousness. Jameson stepped forward. Gabriel's hand shot out to stop him, but Jameson pushed it aside. Come in, he said to the Gharnian. Come in, out of this weather, and find the aid you need here, sir. Are you armed? A wheeze, an area rattle. I am, but I have no intention of using them. You may disarm me. I will not resist. Weapons ready to fire at the slightest provocation were held at bay. Devlin stepped back, allowing the huge man passage inside the ship. Everyone took a step back, forming a circle around the stranger, who was so large he had to bend down to pass within the doorframe. King Dave braved another step toward him. Gabriel stood close behind, his blaster aimed at the man's throat. "One false move," Binder warned. "Do you understand?" The shadow took form as the lights eased on. "Yes, I can see well in the dark," he replied in the same rumbling voice, "and couldn't if I wanted to, which I don't." The Gharnian was broad-shouldered and tall, at least 7 feet, if not more. His striped garb was torn and bloody, dripping with rainwater into puddles on the floor at his feet. A bone protruded from his right forearm. "You are the rider of the Usurapi," Gabriel said. "We've seen you before." "Yes," Kadazat answered. His odd face mask had air tubes that connected to a pack upon his back. It hid all his facial features except for one eye that was visible where part of his helmet had been blown off. "The bird is mine." He turned and looked at Gabriel. "You must be the one that I saw among the trees near Arrowgreen," he said. "Where is your steed?" "She's under your fighter craft, hiding from the storm. She too is badly injured and may not survive the night." "I'll check outside," Ott said, stealing past the Gharnian back out through the door, closing it behind him. "Yeah, we saw your brethren pursuing you," Jameson said to him. I lost them in the storm. How could it be that they pursue you and you are forced to flee from your own kind?" "That is a long saga," Kadazat answered. He looked down at Jameson and stared at him for a few moments as if suddenly aware of his presence for the first time. It was a strange and uncomfortable moment of focus and recognition. The air suddenly grew tense and weapons were readied once again. Kadazat took a deep breath. The sound was like that of congested air swirling in a leaky barrel. "Are you he?" he asked, somewhat in awe. "Are you the one they seek?" Jameson stood fixed and confident, eyeing the Gharnian with caution. "Who is it that you believe he is?" Devlin questioned. Kadazat seemed shaken, as if encountering the most paradoxical irony in his entire life. "Answer," Devlin commanded. "Of all ironies and coincidences," he replied, and even mustered a sound that might have been an attempt at a sad chuckle. "The heir of the all-powerful, ancestor of the first, descendant of the day immortal, the one my kindred seek," Kadazat rumbled. Then he mumbled almost unintelligibly as he began to fade. "The Stone Seeker." Suddenly his knees buckled and he fell headlong, crashing onto the floor with a thud, out cold. "Don't kill him," Jameson cried. "He may tell us more." "Could be a trap," Binder said, straddling the Gharnian with his blaster pointed at his head. "I believe he fainted," Drer Freygood said. "He's ill." "Suicide soldiers," Gabriel reminded them. He crept in closer with a pair of handcuffs from the galley stockade. "We'd best take no chance of securing." "He must be a traitor," Jameson said, or an escaped prisoner. "And a fugitive," Devlin agreed, helping the prince with the shackles. "And with a story to tell, but to what purpose? We should beware. Traitors and escaped prisoners are desperate and unstable at best, particularly fanatical soldiers. Who knows what types of brainwashing and tortures have befallen him? He could be confused, or deceiving us, or quite insane." Lightning lit the skies outside. It was followed by a pounding hammer like thunder that rattled the broken glass in the windows. Boom, 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 boom. Dreher Freygood approached the soldier to get a better look at him. He is hurt badly, he said. And remember, he's been out in a storm without any cover, and you know what the Twister did to us, protected as we were by this ship. Before that, he's been in battle with the Gharnians, for whatever reason. I doubt, with the distance he's covered from arrow grain, that he's slept for days. Binder was removing Katazat's unique and varied weapons. There were many. Most of the ammo has been spent, he remarked. His breathing apparatus is damaged, too. I find it odd that we kept crossing paths with this fellow out here in the wildlands, Devlin ventured to say. Nothing happens without a reason. Nothing is coincidence. Ott came back inside, soaked to the skin. Usurapi's below us, like he said, curled up beneath the turbines to keep warm, but she's badly injured. Wings are broken. She's lost an eye, and she's burned very badly. One of her feet's mangled. She's gonna die, he said. I'll see to her, Dreher volunteered. I have substances for pain. If she's as you say, she should be put out of her misery, poor beast. Well, let's move our prisoner to a secured cot, Binder said. Let's see to his injuries before we begin interrogating him. So much for resting, thinking, organizing, and strategizing. Let's forego our respite. We should get on out of here before we have any more unwanted visitors, Devlin advised. Make haste. Let's get out of these plains and cross that next border. 46. Katazat remained unconscious and with fever for 4 days. And then, for the next 3, he faded in and out of consciousness without exchanging any coherent dialogue with them. Just moans and discernible mumbles. He was secured steadfast to a reinforced bunk with shackles and chains, but everyone did their best to see to his minimal comfort. Upon investigation, they found his multiple wounds much more complex and severe than they had first suspected. Injuries that would have killed any normal man. Somehow, either out of a lifetime of discipline or an intense training, or by the strength of will alone, under the keen, watchful care of Dreher Freygood and the crew of Stardeer, Katazat began pulling through, slowly forward, toward a long and painful recovery. His bones were wet, his wounds were sutured, his burns were salved, and he was tended constantly to ward off infections. Dreher was usually at his bedside during the day, Gabriel through the night, and Devlin and Jameson always remained close by, waiting anxiously to talk with him. At all times, either Commander Binder or Sir Athygorus was on guard by the door, armed to the teeth and always ready, should the Gharnian somehow regain his strength and attempt anything devious or unexpected. While nursing him back to health, they were never able to completely remove his mask or breathing apparatus while repairing it, for fear of smothering him. It was an integral part of his Gharnian physiology. He had hydraulic plasteel implants on and in his ribs, arms, and legs, not unlike those that Binder had, and plates of biomechanical exoskeletal armor implanted in strategic places upon his body. There was a complex, oval, dome-shaped glass case that they guessed regulated his heartbeat and blood flow, affixed surgically in his chest just below the skin, right above his heart. Powered by what source? They could not successfully determine. Dreher had never seen anything like it and was in awe of the medical technology, suspecting that it was another creation of the technological genius Igar Facto. He admitted that it was far beyond the realm of his own expertise. He still did the best he could. On the morning of his 8th day aboard Stardeer, Katazats awoke for a few minutes, mumbling something about his wife and son, and then he slipped away again. Percy came in and asked if he could relieve Dreher at Katazats' bedside. "If you've been down here for over a week, my friend," the Mehekian said, "let me take your shift for you today." "A Mehekian caring for a Gharnian," Dreher replied. "I would have never expected to see that in my lifetime. I'll be up on deck getting some air if you need anything, my friend." Dreher went up to find a glorious day outside, stiff legs aching. The suns were blazing in the fields of Tuus, where aflame with colors and life. The recent rains had inspired a myriad of wildflower growth and blossom, and the wildlife was taking full advantage of the fair weather. There were large white cranes feeding everywhere, leaping to flight as Stardeer whizzed quickly past, only to circle and land again after they felt it was safe. The songs of insects, birds, and multitudes of frogs filled the air. From above, they heard the screech of some predatory eagle or hawk, high overhead on the hunt. Dreher found newcomers Lake and Clan near the rear of the ship, assisting one another as they futilely attempted to change Ott's head bandage. The Thordians seemed to be napping by the sound of his cavernous purr. "A little tighter or it'll slip off," Dreher said. "Thordians have big heads." "I heard that," Ott retorted sleepily, then snorted and resumed his repose. "I'm having a bit of trouble," Quan admitted. "I've never bandaged a Thordian's head before. It's so furry." "I'm sure you're doing quite a few things that you've never done before. Aren't you, Quan?" "True," he said. "Very true, Lore Master. I was thinking about you two earlier, and what an experience all this must be for you." "Your first excursion off Rotengala," Dreher said, finishing the dressing up for them. "There you go," he said to Ott. Ott inspected the work with his paws. Satisfied and rested, he stood and stretched, then left the three of them to chat while he went below to check on the prisoner. "So what do you think of all this?" Dreher continued. "This adventure out in the wildlands, I mean." Lake smiled. "We never had storms like these in Tungulin," he admitted. Cran nodded. "It's amazing," he said. "Everything's so big and beautiful. And dangerous," Lake added. "Well, we're very grateful and honored to be along," Quan said, "and I hope we're not a hindrance. We want to do our part." "Don't be silly," Dreher said. "You're a good man. We're fortunate to have you along with us. You're an essential part of this team, so never think otherwise." The two castle rangers nodded gratefully. "It does take a little getting used to at first," Dreher told them. "You never know what each day will bring, or what surprise may suddenly just pop up out of nowhere. Out here, you must often live by your wits, if you are to live at all, and without any of the comforts of home." Lake nodded. "Like food," he said. "I'm starved. Our shelves are as bare as a bone. Where are we going to find something to eat? I'm afraid we may become Ott's next meal if we don't find something soon." "We'll eat again," Dreher assured them. "I guarantee you that, my young friends. From a marketplace or a tavern or food from the wilds, we'll find a meal somewhere. We might get hungry first, but eventually, I guarantee you, we will eat again. Just tighten your belts a notch and don't think about it." 47. Now the rain was not more than a spritz of fine mist. There were wide blue stretches in the heavens, devoid of any rain clouds at all. Devlin was at the helm of his battered but fully functioning Stardeer, heading due south along a steppe of small brown hills. The warm wind tousled his reddish-white beard. "Hello," he called out to the crew behind him. "You want to see something?" Ask King Day to come up for a moment. There's a bit of Tuusian history just ahead of us. Dreher opened the rear trap door to the lower deck and called to the rest of the crew, except for Binder, who remained at Cadizot's bedside. All came topside to see what all the commotion was about. Devlin told them to look straight ahead and report what they saw there. Gabriel and Dreher recognized the shape instantly and were delighted, but the rest of the crew were at a loss. "I don't see anything," Jameson replied. "Nor I," Ott admitted. That big round mesa rock is strange, though. Is there something on that big black butte just ahead of us?" "On that flat top hill? I don't believe so, other than some scrub brush and a few small trees," the wizard answered with a laugh. "Interesting patterns on it, though," Percy replied, "almost like a network of trails crossing over it, or irrigation troughs, kind of like reptilian scales on a huge shell. It looks man-made, as if rock carvings. I can definitely detect patterns now." "I'll give you a clue," Devlin said. "That is no hill at all, my friends. Look closer." "A rock?" Jameson asked. "A big round rock?" "I give up, Devlin. What is it?" Suddenly, the entire hill moved. It actually rose up from the ground, lunged forward 10 or 12 yards, then it settled to the earth again, shaking the trees on top of it. "The hill is moving! It's alive!" Jameson exclaimed. "Indeed it is alive," Devlin remarked, exceedingly pleased. "It is a great Tuusian prairie tortoise. A Tuus tortoise for short, if you will. One of the last, if not the very last. We'll be coming up upon her in a moment or two, and we can all have a closer look. The beast is ancient and magnificent. I have no idea how old. As old as the planet itself, I've been told." "She's beautiful," Gabriel replied. "Beautiful?" Jameson refuted. "She's hideously ugly. Her shell is so immense that we used to hold wizard initiations and alumnus conventions upon her flattened back when I was a younger wizard. You can see a great pyre of ash right there at the summit. I suppose she's 300 yards long if she's an inch, and 200 yards wide. A small forest grows upon her shell, and indeed that forest is old itself, older than any forest in these lands. It's said that an old hermit lives up there somewhere, but he's so shy that he's rarely seen." As they drew in upon her, circling the monster's flank to the right, the huge flattened hind limbs and tail became visibly evident, appearing almost as the rise of the great brown hills before a mountain. Each scale was the size of a boulder. Her blunt claws were as large as great tree trunks. "So amazing," Jameson replied. They swept past in a long arc. The beast's old eyes were dull and fixed, paying them no mind. She opened her huge shovel-like mouth to scoop up a hunk of earth from the ground, and then she shook the dirt loose through a massive baleen filter on her lower throat and jaw, with great twists of her massive head, to ease your feed on the scrubby vegetation alone. "She's immense," Percy decreed. "And look there, on the rise to the west, a nest." "Oh my, eggs!" Dreher cried. "She's laid eggs, Devlin." "Well, I'll be," the wizard said, shaking his head. "She's probably been in gestation for centuries. I wonder how long before they hatch. Certainly not in our lifetime." "When was the last sighting of a male tortoise?" Gabriel asked. "I've heard of none, but they do burrow and sleep for many, many years at a time. Any one of those distant hills could be a sleeping tortoise overgrown with forest vegetation." "Someday our party will reunite here for a victory celebration, as was done in the days of old," Dreher declared. "We will rejoice and build a great fire and sing and dance and get drunk and have merrymaking for a month. For all these harrowing days will be long past, and all but our most valiant of times will be forgotten. If any of you are still alive, said a hollow, rumbling, barely lucid voice from behind them. Catazot the Gharnian was there on his unsteady feet, still heavily shackled, standing before Binder, who guarded him with 2 drawn blasters. If any of us are still alive, I see that I am now your prisoner, although I have done you no wrong. Our countries are not presently at war. I ask to be unshackled and released immediately. Return me my weapons and set me on the ground. I'll be gone and trouble you no more. Jameson stepped toward him. No, not yet, he answered. Not before we have a chance to talk, Catazot of Garn. You owe us that. Then we'll decide your fate. There is much at stake here. Setting you free might create a whole new set of problems for us. Catazot bowed slightly at the waist. As you wish, he said. I will tell you all I know. I have no reason not to anymore. All right, back in the hold, Binder instructed the prisoner, leading him by his shackles. All right, that's the end of part 1. We'll do part 2 of Tuus tomorrow.